Hello, and welcome to the CDSE Cybersecurity pre-recorded webinar. My name is Rebecca Morgan, a cybersecurity instructor here at the CDSE, and your host and presenter for this webinar. We're joined by my co-presenter, Wes Sweetser. He's a cybersecurity instructor here for CDSE, has been with the DoD for many years, and holds Security Plus and Project Management Professional certifications. Today's topic is an introduction to the top 20 critical security controls. As a reminder, all contractors under the National Industrial Security Program are required to configure their systems in accordance with the Office of the Designated Approving Authority's Process Manual and Baseline Technical Security Configurations, which have been carefully crafted to include the security controls we're going to discuss today. I know many of you are aware of the new DoD regulations surrounding cybersecurity, and many are particularly curious about the top 20 critical security controls. Let's pass it over to Wes to learn more about this topic.
Okay, thanks, Rebecca. As you all know, information technology and systems are integral to operations at DoD. While these systems have brought great benefits to the battlefield as well as the office, they also represent a vulnerability. DoD systems are subject to threats that can have adverse effects on organizational operations, assets, and the nation. In an effort to counter those threats, we will address the following topics. We'll first briefly define cybersecurity, then in more detail, examine each of these top 20 critical security controls and tie them to related NIST 800-53 controls, so you have something actionable to take and build into your organization. A variety of resource links will be presented at different times throughout the presentation. So, if information systems represent vulnerabilities for DoD, how do we protect them? In the past, DoD guidance focused on information assurance. Now, as you may be aware, DoD information assurance has undergone a transformation to cybersecurity. So what's changed? Everything and nothing. Information assurance has always been the cornerstone of any good cybersecurity program, but by broadening the definition, DoD has come to a more holistic approach to managing cyber risks.
I know you're aware of this, Wes, and our listeners probably are too, but it's worth noting that each year there are thousands of attempts to defeat DoD safeguards and penetrate computer networks. These are attacks that attempt to access or modify information by unauthorized users or to cause a denial of service for authorized users. Many of you have likely received specific attacks at your facilities or commands, but it's important to remember that because of the interconnected nature of our information systems, a risk to one is a risk to all. The top 20 critical security controls can help us focus on information security and point to concepts and related tools needed to protect, detect, characterize, counter, and mitigate unauthorized activities and vulnerabilities. Now here we're looking at the top 20 critical security controls that we're going to cover today. They're in alphabetical order here, not necessarily the order of importance. We're going to examine each of these in more detail, and we're going to do that in the context of the NIST 853 security controls, which is a series of publications that some of you may already be familiar with. Each of the top 20 critical security controls maps to a subset of those NIST controls, and there's an access link there that you can check out. We'll take some time to examine each of those top 20. Please note that we only have a limited amount of time, so we're going to be at a fairly high level for each of those. But we will link it to the corresponding NIST control, and you can go back on your own time into these publications and read about them in more depth. Wes, why don't you kick us off with the account monitoring and control?
Thank you, Rebecca. Inactive user accounts may be vulnerable to impersonation and unauthorized access. So you can keep attackers from impersonating legitimate users by employing account monitoring and control. This has three related NIST security controls. Policy and procedures reflect applicable federal laws, executive orders, directives, regulations, policies, and guidance. Account management establishes conditions for group and role membership and specifies authorized users of information systems. Access enforcement ties everything together. Please see the NIST Special Publication 800-53 as well as 800-53A, which is in draft as of this presentation, if you would like to find more details on each of these controls.
You know, Wes, when you say inactive accounts, I'm wondering exactly what you're talking about.
It could be that someone's been out on leave or TDY. Particularly in the classified environment, you could have a laptop that somebody doesn't use for a significant period of time.
So this would be not just somebody who's no longer with the company or the command, but even just something that's inactive for a significant period.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Application software security has a number of related NIST security controls. Least functionality is where the organization configures the information system to provide only essential capabilities and restricts ports, protocols, and services. Vulnerability scanning is not only important for application software security, but for 5 others of these top 20. Acquisition contracts need to adequately address security requirements. An organization needs to define and document information security roles and responsibilities throughout the system development lifecycle, so security engineering principles can be properly applied. There must be a security assessment plan and related security testing and evaluation, along with remediation. Application software design needs to pay particular attention to input validation, as well as error handling, to be prepared to fend off a variety of possible attacks. Do you carefully test application software for security flaws, including coding errors and malware? Have you deployed web application firewalls that inspect all traffic and explicitly check for errors in all user input? Boundary defense is extremely important and has quite a few NIST controls. The overall architecture needs to be built with security in mind, with adequate hardware and software to protect against malicious code attacks. Once built, perimeter device configurations need to be set to industry standards. Defense Department STIG checklists are available for this from the IASE web link on the screen. Multi-factor authentication must be in place for your organizational users, and rules and restrictions need to be put in place for non-organizational users. Remote access needs to be controlled, and any external systems and connections need to be handled very carefully. Mobile code usage needs to be defined and appropriate restrictions put in place. Vulnerability scanning and monitoring are also components of boundary defense. Remember, weaknesses in configuration or architecture on perimeter systems or network devices can give attackers access into the system. Back to you, Rebecca.
Thanks, Wes. Our next control recognizes the fact that over time, network devices may become less securely configured. Now, you can proactively identify and repair software vulnerabilities reported by security researchers or vendors by employing the continuous vulnerability assessment and remediation security control. This control involves putting in place policies and procedures, conducting risk assessments, and then regularly performing vulnerability scans with appropriate remediation. The Defense Department uses HBSS for host-based security, and there are a number of network vulnerability scanning tools available, including the Assured Compliance Assessment Solution, or ACAS tool. Training for ACAS is available from the FedVTE site at the link displayed on the screen. Controlled access based on the need to know employs a number of elements to secure and segregate data. Included are the first 3 NIST security controls that we saw earlier under the Account and Monitoring Control section. In addition to those, we rely on information flow enforcement, which makes use of packet or message filtering capabilities based on checking header information and message content, respectively. The principle of least privilege makes sure users only access information they need for their job. Security categorization and media marking keep everyone aware of the security or sensitivity classification of information. You can refer to Chapter 4 of the NIST POM for more information about classification and marking at the link displayed on the screen. Now remember, sensitive data that is mixed with less sensitive data may be easily compromised. You should carefully identify and separate critical data from information that is readily available to internal network users. And this control really reminds me that it's not just the IT professional that needs to participate in information assurance and cybersecurity. A lot of the marking and security categorization is going to be done with your information security professionals and the other security professionals at your facility. And you want to make sure that they're aware of this as well. All right, let's move on and talk about the controlled use of administrative privileges. This is related to the control we just discussed and relies on the principle of least privilege to ensure administrative privileges are only used by those with the appropriate training and an assigned administrator role. Remote access is established with appropriate security controls for administrators and audit events, including administrative privilege use events. These security controls help to protect and validate administrative accounts on desktop, laptops, and servers in order to prevent some common attacks. What's our next control, Wes?
Well, data protection. Data is one of the most important assets an organization has, and one of the primary reasons hackers hack. Data protection relies heavily on boundary protection and information system monitoring. Information flow enforcement we discussed earlier in the context of controlled access. In the context now of data protection, this NIST control regulates where data and information are allowed to travel within and between information systems. Media access, storage, and transport deal with protecting data in both digital and non-digital formats. Transmission confidentiality and integrity protect data physically using protected distribution systems or logically using encryption. Protection of information at rest can be accomplished using encryption or secure offline storage. Make sure you always check the movement of data across network boundaries, both electronically and physically, to minimize exposure to hackers. Data recovery capability, including backup and recovery, is critical for every organization and relates to contingency planning, disaster recovery, as well as business continuity. Be sure to protect the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of backup data and information at all storage locations. Have you implemented a plan for removing all traces of attacks? Do you automatically back up all information required to fully restore each system, including the operating system, application software, and data? Proper data recovery capability can minimize the damage and related costs from any attack or natural disaster. Incident response is key to protecting the organization and minimizing damage after a cyber attack or other incident. Policy addresses purpose, scope, roles, responsibilities, management commitment, coordination among organizational entities, and compliance. Procedures facilitate the implementation of the policy and associated controls. The incident response plan is derived from the procedures and contains detailed information on how to handle incidents. Please refer to NIST 800-53 and 53A to find out more about what to include in the incident response plan. You need to have trained staff. Not only do you need advanced training for responders, but awareness training for every staff member so they can recognize an incident, such as a phishing attack resulting in a virus download or a classified spill. Incident handling for security incidents involves preparation, detection and analysis, containment, eradication and recovery, coordinating incident handling with contingency planning, and incorporating lessons learned. Incident monitoring involves tracking and documenting security incidents. Incident reporting is where everyone knows to report a suspected or actual security incident. For our partners in the cleared defense industry, this means ensuring that the FSO reports required incidents to DSS and/or the FBI where applicable, and for federal agencies to report security incidents to the U.S. Computer Emergency Readiness Team, or U.S. CERT. You may also want to reference the NIST Special Publication 800-61 Incident Handling Guide on the NIST website.
Now, Wes, I'm looking at this list of controls here, and I'm wondering, what happened to IR-3 and IR-7? I know you can count, so tell us, why have these not been included here?
Good observation, Rebecca. Not every IR&M NIST control ties directly to this top 20 control, which is why some NIST controls are omitted. Hey, we're almost halfway done. You ready for a break, or you want to tell us what the next one is?
All right, let's keep going. We've highlighted the NIST website on several of the slides here, and you were just referring to a couple of the controls. And I think everyone should know what a great resource these publications are. Even if our listeners are not subject to the NIST pubs, the information provided is really universal and can highlight best practices for anyone implementing cybersecurity and information assurance back at their organizations. So back to our next control, inventory of authorized and unauthorized devices. This requires setting up an inventory of information systems and components, keeping in mind annual FISMA reporting guidance related to program management. Also, policy and procedures need to be in place for the physical and environmental protection as well. Policies and procedures that enforce physical access authorizations, verify access authorizations, control physical access to the facility, maintain physical access audit logs, escort and monitor visitors, secure keys, combos, and other physical access devices, and those are just to name a few. And again, that list brings back the reminder of what a multidisciplinary subject cybersecurity is. We're talking about physical security, personnel security there, information security. It really is key that all of those groups participate in the information assurance program there at your facility or organization and are at least at a high level aware of these controls that are out there. The other thing about this control is it requires that each organization find a way to measure the effectiveness or efficiency of the information security program and related security controls. These can be captured by the information security measures of performance, and you can refer back to that NIST Special Pub 855 for more information about the performance measurement process. The number of unauthorized devices found during a given time period can be a measure that feeds this process. This control does require a lot of work, admittedly, but the risk associated with uninventoried or unauthorized devices is that new and unprotected systems are vulnerable to exploitation and could enable attackers to access information deeper within the organization. The real goal of these security controls is to reduce the ability of attackers to find and exploit unauthorized and unprotected systems. And so, along those same lines, we also want to run an inventory of authorized and unauthorized software. This control deals largely with configuration management. Configuration management involves policy and procedures as well as a plan. You first establish a configuration baseline, then manage changes to that, typically with a change control board or CCB having final authority for approving all major configuration changes. Configuration management, or CM, is also discussed in Chapter 8 of the NIST POM for our industry partners. Least functionality is where the organization configures the information system to provide only essential capabilities and restricts ports, protocols, or services. We first saw this when we looked at the application software security, and it applies to several other of these top 20 critical security controls as well. Information system component inventory we just covered for devices, and it applies equally well for software tracking. Keep in mind that many organizations have an approved software list, and if something needs to be installed that isn't on the list, the CCB needs to first authorize it so it can be added. Information security measures of performance and the related performance measures process were just mentioned for devices. In this case, the number of unauthorized software installs found during a given time period could be a good measure that feeds the process. As you all may know, certain versions of software are vulnerable to exploitation from backdoor programs, bots, zero-day exploits. The real goal of this security control is to identify vulnerable or malicious software to mitigate or root out such attacks. All right, let's look at our next one. We've touched on these NIST controls in the other top 20s, but this one does deserve its own focus. Poorly configured web servers, mail servers, DNS servers, and file and print services may give attackers remote access. To establish a secure perimeter, you must prohibit or restrict the use of certain ports, protocols, and/or devices. For DoD guidance, you can check out the Ports, Protocols, and Services Management, or PPSM, page on the IASE webpage highlighted here. The Information Assurance Support Environment website is maintained by the Defense Information Systems Agency, and it's a pretty great resource for all things cybersecurity at DoD. They also have the related Category Assurance List, or CAL documents. The CAL documents identify what's prohibited for use in DoD, what can be mitigated and what is acceptable. Please note that the CAL page is PKI restricted, so you're going to need your email certificate or CAT card for access. Now, for our industry partners, you're not going to be subject to this per se, but you're definitely going to want to check with your Defense Security Service ISSP or the ODAA documentation to find out what's required. Wes, why don't you tell us about the next control?
Okay, thanks, Rebecca. Auditing logs is very important to help identify threats and attempted break-ins. Here we see many NIST 800-53 controls associated with this top 20 critical control. To put this in perspective for our partners in the cleared defense industry, per the DSS ODAA Process Manual version 3.2, system audit trails will be analyzed and reviewed at least weekly, with a recommendation to stagger review days and times. And at all times, a minimum of 12 months of audit trails are required to be available for review. There's also guidance available in the DSS ODAA Standardization of Baseline Technical Security Configurations and other documents, which can be requested from the website shown on the slide. The next slide illustrates the flow that occurs with respect to several aspects of auditing. As you can see, the central key focus of auditing is to review and analyze system audit records and report the findings. Organizations first identify audit events as those events which are significant and relevant to system security. Then, identify detailed content of audit records to assist with tracking down cybersecurity-related problems. Next, consider the type of auditing to be performed, and be sure to allocate sufficient storage capacity for the audit logs to reduce the chance of exceeding capacity, which of course could result in loss of critical audit information. The system needs to generate audit records for specified events. Timestamps based on the internal system clock are used to identify exactly when the events take place. And the system needs to be set up to protect audit information and to related tools from unauthorized access, modification, and deletion. The auditing system needs to let you know if and when problems occur with the audit mechanism itself, such as failure in an audit capturing mechanism or capacity issues, so that corrective measures can be taken. Flaws in security logging and analysis may help attackers disguise location, activities, and malicious software placement on machines. So make sure to use detailed logs to identify and uncover details of an attack, including when, where, what, and the scope of activity on victims' machines. Please keep in mind that all the controls we've looked at work hand in hand to protect your system. Here we see malware defenses, which are used in conjunction with previously discussed boundary defenses and data protection. Mobile code technologies include Java, JavaScript, ActiveX, PDF, and others. Each organization needs to define what is acceptable mobile code, establish guidance for its use, and monitor the use of mobile code within the information system. Malicious code protection involves not only antivirus software, but can involve intrusion detection and intrusion prevention systems at the perimeter, where there are key entry and exit points. User security awareness training is also very important. The best defenses in the world won't be effective when someone opens the door to an attacker. Honeypots are decoy systems designed to be targets for attackers. By using a honeypot to capture information from a hacker, appropriate counterattacks can be designed to enhance the defense mechanisms in place for the real system. Malicious code can make changes to data stored on the system, can capture sensitive information and transmit it to other systems. These security controls help keep malicious code from tampering with system settings or contents, capturing data and spreading it. Red teams can help determine the strength of our overall defenses. Rebecca, could you please tell us more about this?
Sure, Wes. Our next control looks at red teaming or ethical hacking as a mechanism to help determine and correct weaknesses prior to a real attack. Now, this can be accomplished by informing users in advance, or in a more realistic scenario, by not letting folks know at all. Internal teams or even external security consultants can be deployed to run these types of scenarios. Now, this entire process should be part of an overall continuous monitoring program for your organization. A security assessment plan is developed to determine the scope of the exercise. Vulnerability scanning can be used to identify issues for each machine on an entire network. Stealth scanning can determine how well a hacker can perform this type of activity. And then the ethical hacking team will see how well the boundary is protected, and will be able to provide risk assessment results to the organization. And you know, Wes, in my experience, these type of operational exercises are some of the most effective in identifying vulnerabilities and increasing awareness for the users of the system. I mean, it's one thing to preach policy and another for them to click through a learning session, but when you confront them with some of the shortcomings of cybersecurity practice in an exercise like this, it seems like people really remember it. People, it sticks with them more. Okay, let's move on to our next control. We're going to look at secure configurations for hardware and software. There are various hardware and software settings on user devices which, if improperly set, can allow an intruder to gain access to the host system and maybe even the network. Each device or software manufacturer should provide guidance for their particular products. If you're purchasing new hardware and software, security configuration guidance should be referenced in all the applicable acquisition documents. And Wes, you can even set up an image so that if you correctly configure one machine, you can duplicate that on all your machines and not have to reconfigure each of them, which in a large organization can be a real time saver. You're still going to want to confirm, though, by doing some checking that the configuration took and that everything's appropriately set on each of your systems. Vulnerability scanning products can be used to look for incorrect configurations after a device has been configured to determine if someone altered the baseline configuration. DSS provides a security configuration guide for workstations and laptops, and you can obtain that by clicking the link on the screen. We do not have the tool that used to exist. There is no longer an approved DSS scanning tool, but we definitely have the guidelines there that need to be followed. If you're in DoD, you can also refer to the NSA link for some configuration guidelines that may apply to your machines. Please note, too, that the NIST website has a guide for security-focused configuration management of information systems, and that's under Special Pub 800-128. Okay. Now, you probably know this, too, but there are also hardware and software settings on the network devices, which, if improperly set, can allow an intruder to gain access to the network. Each device or software manufacturer should provide guidance for their particular products. Things like default passwords need to be removed, and appropriate access needs to be set up for your organizational users, as well as non-organizational users where appropriate. These may be vendors or suppliers or maintenance personnel, temporary employees, anybody who's going to have access to your system. Now, secure configurations have the goal of protecting the confidentiality and integrity of organizational information, and this can be accomplished either by physical means, such as using protected distribution systems, or by logical means with encryption techniques. A website link for security configuration guides at NSA can be reached by clicking the link on the screen, and you can also refer back to that IASE website we talked about. There's a link there for configuration guidance as well. What do we have next, Wes?
Secure network engineering is next up. This involves the integration of information security requirements and associated security controls into an organization's enterprise architecture to help ensure security considerations are addressed early in the system development lifecycle and are directly related to the organization's processes. This includes applying security engineering principles during the specification, design, development, implementation, and modification of an information system. Boundary protection has been discussed before and is included in many of the top 20. This process of secure network engineering is where it begins to be considered. Regarding DNS, for a secure DNS architecture, you should have at least 2 DNS servers. DNS client resolvers either perform validation of DNS security signatures, or clients use authenticated channels to recursive resolvers that perform such validations. Systems that use technologies other than DNS for mapping between host service names and network addresses provide other means to enable clients to verify the authenticity and integrity of response data. Please refer to the OMB Memorandum 08-23 link on the screen for additional information. We've mentioned training a few times already. Of course, this webinar is a training tool, and most of us are familiar with annual security awareness training. If you aren't, please note it's very important to have a policy and related training in place so that users are reminded on a regular basis to be aware of techniques used by attackers, and in light of that, to exercise due diligence every day. Users with special responsibilities require additional security training depending on their role, and it is important to keep training records for however long required by policy or law. You can take annual security training and have a permanent transcript by going to the CDSE STEP website shown on the screen. Finally, wireless access is an area that requires appropriate levels of security, access control, protection of the content in transit, and routine monitoring, detection, and protection. Wireless technologies include microwave, packet radio, 802.11x, and Bluetooth. Wireless networks use authentication protocols such as EAP, TLS, and PEEP, which provide credential protection and mutual authentication. Wireless devices are often remotely exploited when used outside the organization. The controls shown here can protect the security perimeter against unauthorized wireless access.
And you know, Wes, I think this is such a critical control, especially in these days of bring your own device.
Yeah, Rebecca, this is last in our list, but it is not the least important by any means.
Well, that was our last control. Thank you so much, Wes. We've covered a lot of information in a short amount of time today. I realize we did this at a high level in order to get through all of them for you, but I really encourage everyone to download and print out the slides from today's webinar. You can find them at the link on CDSE's website, and I think they'll make a pretty great resource for our listeners if you need to revisit this information in the course of your duties, or you may want to access some of the site links that we provided. To sum it all up, we know that information technology and systems are integral to operations here at DoD, and I think by now we all know that these systems are under a constant threat. In an effort to counter these threats, we need to be diligent in protecting our information systems. The top 20 critical security controls and the related NIST controls that we discussed are a great starting point to accomplish that goal. And they're probably among the best resources we have to ensure the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information processed, stored, or transmitted on our DoD systems. Now again, just as a reminder, all of the contractors under the NIST who are out there listening, you are required to configure your system in accordance with the ODAA process manual and baseline technical configuration standards. But rest assured, the standards have been carefully crafted to include the security controls similar to the ones that we're discussing here today. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Just to let you know, previous webinars, including our recent Cyber Insider Threat and Risk Management Framework Overview, have been archived, and they're available on our website at the link you see here. You can also visit the CDSE Cybersecurity webpage, as Wes mentioned, under the training section, and check out some of our existing offerings, including e-learning. We have instructor-led courses. We have short learning topics. And we've also recently launched some toolkits that will be useful to our listeners. There's the Cybersecurity Professional and the Information System Security Manager Toolkit, and those are both available for free and a pretty good resource for our listeners right now. So I want to give my thanks again to Wes Sweetser for putting this together. It was a great presentation. Also, nobody has heard from her, but we have a wonderful producer, Tina, who's helped us accomplish this webinar. On behalf of them and all of CDSE, this is Rebecca Morgan saying thanks for joining us for CDSE's Cybersecurity Webinar Series. Have a great day.